Okay, let's unpack this. What if the supernatural just isn't supernatural at all?
Hmm.
What if things like ghosts, angels, jinns, even these huge events like the miracle of the sun at Fatima, what if it was actually just physics?
That really is the core question we're tackling today, isn't it?
Oh,
We're
yeah.
looking at centuries of stories, folklore, uh, miracles,
Right.
and the idea is to try and strip away the cultural interpretation, look at them as just raw observational data.
Exactly. And for you listening, the mission here is really to get a shortcut into a pretty radical unified theory. We're digging into anecdotal, historical, religious literature, but not for theology.
No, not at all.
We're treating them like field notes, notes from witnesses who just didn't have the language of modern physics, right?
Mm.
We're trying to go from myth to dark matter, basically.
And the framework for that jump is crucial. The sources we're diving into, they really center around the work of an independent researcher, J. Alfred.
Hey, Alfred, okay.
And his central idea is what he calls the dark plasma hypothesis.
And this is, it's more than just finding patterns in old stories, isn't it? This hypothesis tries to unify all these seemingly separate things from all over the world.
That's the goal. Fiery pillars in Exodus, Marian apparitions in the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
The claim is they all share consistent physical characteristics. And these characteristics line up surprisingly well with what we know about natural plasma phenomena. It suggests there might be one single underlying physical cause for, well, potentially every miraculous sighting in history.
Wow. So the core idea is we stop just dismissing these accounts.
Yeah.
We don't just say, oh, that's myth or that's fantasy.
Exactly. Instead, we treat them as potential evidence for, let's say, exotic forms of life.
Exotic life, like aliens.
Sort of, but maybe closer to home. Plasma-based entities, specifically, composed of dark matter, and they might be evolving in these hidden dark matter sectors of the universe right alongside us. Think of them as, well, interterrestrial neighbors we just haven't properly identified yet.
Interterrestrial. I like that. It really shifts the perspective. It reminds me a bit of, the history of astronomy.
How so?
Well, like eclipses, right? Ancient cultures thought it was a dragon eating the sun or an angry god.
Yeah, lots of fear and superstition.
Exactly. But then, Anaxagoras, the Greek philosopher, he came along and said, no, wait, it's just shadows. He used physics, simple geometry, to explain it.
That's a perfect analogy. And the sources argue this work is trying to do something similar, replace maybe centuries of theological interpretation with, well, with plasma physics and dark matter physics.
So the idea is maybe pre-scientific cultures saw these bright plasma things and called them angels or gods.
Or the darker, more shadowy ones, maybe they call those demons or ghosts.
Right.
Simply because they didn't have the scientific vocabulary, they lacked the toolkit to describe it as a natural, albeit unusual phenomenon.
It's fascinating because we're using religious texts, things usually reserved for faith discussions, as potential empirical records.
Right.
Which raises a huge question. If we take these accounts seriously as observations, what can 21st century physics actually tell us about these experiences that people have reported consistently for centuries? And maybe more importantly, what does this life actually look like?
It suggests the phenomena weren't made up, they were just misinterpreted based on the observer's worldview. But to get into the how, we need to lay out the invisible infrastructure, the physics that potentially makes it all possible.
Okay, let's start big. Dark matter. It's supposed to be, 85% of the universe's matter? But we can't see it. The sources take this concept and develop ideas like dark plasma and these dark earths. Can you break down those foundational ideas for us?
Absolutely. So J. Alfred's theory starts with the idea that a good chunk of the dark matter near our Earth isn't just isolated particles, but exists as a complex, self-interacting dark plasma.
Okay, dark plasma.
Yeah.
Like regular plasma, but made of dark matter.
Essentially, yes. And crucially, the hypothesis proposes that our ordinary planet might actually share its orbit with co-rotating planets made of this dark plasma.
Whoa, hang on. Co-rotating dark matter planets.
Yeah, they're termed dark plasmaspheres in the source material. Think of them as gravitationally tied to our Earth, spinning along with us. These are the dark Earths.
So not like another planet in the solar system, but more like an invisible layer or shell orbiting with Earth. That's mind-bending.
It is, but it's not entirely out of left field, cosmologically speaking. The source points out that scientists are already actively searching for dark matter planets elsewhere, dark exoplanets.
Right, I've heard about that.
The hypothesis flips that around and suggests, maybe ironically, that the most relevant dark matter structures for us aren't far away, but are these dark Earths gravitationally bound right here?
Which would mean all those dark matter detection experiments, the ones deep underground, trying to catch a particle interaction.
Mm-hmm.
They might not just be looking out into the cosmos. They could be unintentionally probing
Mm-hmm.
these local dark Earths right next door.
That's exactly the implication. And the phenomena we're discussing today, these apparitions and miracles, are proposed to originate primarily from what the author calls the lowest energy dark Earth.
Lowest energy.
Yeah, think of it like different shells or layers. This lowest one has a sort of habitable zone that occasionally intersects with ours, and that intersection allows for these, well, intersector visitations, as Alfred puts it.
Okay. Okay. But how does something totally invisible, this tenuous dark plasma life form, suddenly become visible? Bright, even. How does it interact?
Right, that's the key transition. And it brings us to the mechanism called the dark ionization process. This is how the invisible supposedly makes a visible impact.
Dark ionization. Let's break that down.
Okay, so imagine this dark plasma life form. Normally, it's very diffuse, very low density, invisible. But if it wants to manifest, the theory suggests it can rapidly increase its density by reducing its volume. It's described as a kind of pumping action, like compressing a gas into a smaller space.
So the dark plasma entity literally squeezes itself, and its internal density shoots way up.
Correct. And when that density increases dramatically, the collision rate between the dark matter particles making up the entity and the ordinary matter particles in our atmosphere, air molecules, atoms, electrons, that rate goes way up too.
Even though dark matter interacts weakly.
Even with a weak interaction, if the density is high enough collisions happen, and these collisions can knock electrons loose from ordinary atoms. They ionize the ordinary matter around the dark entity.
So it's creating regular plasma, but using dark matter collisions as the trigger.
Exactly. The result is a short-lived but detectable envelope of ordinary cold plasma or non-thermal plasma forming around the dark entity.
Okay, but let's clarify cold plasma. That term can be misleading, right? It's not
Right.
actually freezing.
Definitely not freezing. Yeah, cold or non-thermal just means it's not created by massive heat like, say, the fusion inside the sun or a chemical fire. Think more like the light in a fluorescent tube or the aurora borealis.
Okay, generated electrically, not thermally.
Right. But, and this is important, even though the plasma itself isn't super hot in the conventional sense, the process of creating it, those particle collisions, still releases ordinary energy.
Energy we can detect.
Precisely. It releases ordinary light, radiation, electromagnetic fields, even electricity. And significantly for the historical accounts we'll look at, this process does generate detectable thermal energy, specifically in the infrared and microwave spectrums.
Infrared and microwaves.
Aye.
Okay, that could be key later when we talk about things like heat effects.
It's absolutely crucial. It means there's real measurable energy release, just not from combustion.
All right, so the invisible entity generates a visible shell of ordinary plasma. But why do these manifestations look so different in the accounts? Sometimes brilliant, sometimes shadowy, sometimes they just vanish.
That variation comes down to the density of that plasma shell and its resulting plasma frequency relative to the frequency of the ambient light hitting it. Think of it like a gate or a dial. The paper calls it the plasma frequency gate.
Plasma frequency, that's like the natural vibration rate of the electrons in the plasma.
Exactly. And how that frequency compares to the frequency of incoming light determines how the plasma shell interacts with that light.
So the entity can basically tune its appearance by adjusting its density. How does that work?
Okay, 3 main modes. If the plasma density is very high, its plasma frequency is higher than the frequency of the visible light hitting it.
Higher frequency, so the light can't get through.
Right. It reflects off intensely. This is the arc mode, brilliant, dazzling, sometimes described as metallic looking or like a miniature sun. This is often how angels or deities are described. If the reflection is a bit less intense, it's called glow mode.
Okay, bright and reflective. What if it wants to disappear?
Then it does the opposite. It reduces its density. If the plasma frequency drops below the frequency of the ambient light, the plasma becomes transparent.
Like glass.
Pretty much, yeah. It enters transparent mode. It might seem to vanish completely or maybe just act like a lens, causing a slight shimmer or distortion of whatever's behind it.
And the third mode. The creepy, shadowy figures. The ghosts and demons in folklore.
That's maybe the most interesting one, dark mode. This happens when the plasma frequency is resonant with the frequency of the incoming light.
Resonant, meaning they match up.
Exactly. So instead of reflecting the light, like in arc mode, or letting it pass through transparent mode, the plasma absorbs the light energy.
And when something absorbs light, It looks dark.
Precisely. The entity appears dark, shadowy, like it's sucking the light out of the area, and it's actually gaining energy in the process. It's called resonant absorption. This matches so many descriptions of ghosts or demonic figures.
Wow, so the same invisible entity could, just by controlling its density, appear as a brilliant angel, a
Yeah.
terrifying shadow, or just vanish into thin air. That's a seriously unified explanation for appearance.
It is.
But we still have the interaction problem. How does this thing made of dark matter actually do things in our world beyond just glowing or absorbing light? How does it make sounds?
Yeah.
Create the sensation of touch? Gravity alone isn't enough.
You're absolutely right. And this is where the theory connects to some really cutting-edge physics, the idea of a possible fifth fundamental force.
A fifth force, beyond gravity, electromagnetism, and the nuclear forces.
Exactly. Astronomers and physicists, people like Antonio Bovea, acknowledge that something beyond gravity seems needed for dark matter to communicate or interact with visible matter in ways we observe cosmically.
And the sources point to a specific candidate for this fifth force.
They do. They highlight the experimental results from the Atomic AI group in Hungary. They've repeatedly observed anomalies in certain nuclear decays,
Which ones?
specifically in beryllium-8, helium-4, and also carbon-12 transitions. They see unexpected bumps in the energy spectrum.
Bumps meaning extra particles.
Their interpretation is yes. They propose that these bumps are the signature of a previously unknown particle being created and then decaying a light boson with a mass around 17 megaelectron volts. They called it the X17 boson.
X17. And this isn't part of the standard model of particle physics.
Nope. Completely new. And the evidence is compelling. Jonathan Fang at UC Irvine, for example, calculated the odds of these repeated results being just experimental error as incredibly low, like 1 in a trillion.
1 in a trillion. Okay, that's significant.
Hmm.
So this X17 particle could be the carrier for this new fifth force.
That's the proposal, a new short-range attractive fifth force. And short-range is key here. It operates over about 10 femtometers. That's tiny nucleus-sized distances.
Hold on, 10 femtometers. That's incredibly short range. How can a force that only works over such a tiny distance allow a large, dark plasma entity to, say, make an audible sound or feel like touch? Doesn't that seem like a contradiction?
That's a really sharp question. It sounds counterintuitive, I know. The theory isn't saying this force creates like a solid macroscopic interaction directly. It's more subtle. The key is what the force interacts with. The proposed X17 force is thought to couple strongly to neutrons and, importantly, electrons. So even though its range is tiny, this short-range attraction allows the dense dark plasma body to pull in a very thin veneer of ordinary matter particles right at its boundary.
The veneer. Like a coating.
Exactly. Think of it like an incredibly light, maybe only molecules thick film of ordinary atoms and electrons drawn in close by this fifth force. It's not a solid shell because the dark plasma body itself is so tenuous compared to us. It's a fleeting low-density layer.
Okay, so it's not creating a thick skin, just attracting enough ordinary stuff to bridge the gap slightly.
Precisely. And this transient veneer is what provides the mechanism for those closer interactions. It allows the entity to reflect a bit more light, becoming momentarily visible. Crucially, it allows the dark entity to just barely push ordinary air molecules around it, which could generate low-level sound, like whispers or taps, if it impacts a surface.
Of touch.
And potentially create that sensation of touch, maybe cold, maybe electric, maybe just pressure, if that veneer contacts a human body. It gives us the full scientific toolkit we need, at least theoretically, to go back and look at those historical accounts with fresh eyes.
All right, we've got the toolkit. Dark plasma, dark earths, dark ionization creating ordinary cold plasma, the plasma frequency gate controlling appearance, and this fifth force veneer for interaction via X17. Let's test drive it on some really old foundational accounts.
Yeah.
How about the burning bush? Exodus 3.2. Moses sees a bush that's on fire, but the key phrase is, it was not consumed.
Right. Classic example. The hypothesis zooms in on two key details here. First, the location. Mount Horeb, a mountain.
Why does the mountain matter?
Higher altitudes generally have increased air ionization. The atmosphere is thinner, more cosmic rays get through. The air is just naturally a bit more electrically ready.
Okay, so a high-altitude spot is like a pre-charged environment, making it easier for plasma to form and stick around.
Exactly. It means that the ordinary cold plasma generated by the dark ionization process from this manifesting entity could persist longer before just dissipating into the air. The environment helps sustain it.
And the not consumed part.
That's the dead giveaway for cold plasma. It produces light, maybe some heat, but there's no chemical combustion like a normal fire. What Moses likely saw, according to this theory, was a plasma life form from that lowest energy dark earth, manifesting via dark ionization. He interpreted it through his culture, saw an angel, a divine messenger.
But then there's that odd detail. Moses is told to take off his sandals. You're standing on sacred ground. That sounds purely theological. Does the hypothesis have a physical take on that?
It does, surprisingly. Think electrically. Sandals, especially back then, likely leather, would act as insulators.
Surrounding him from any charge in the mountain.
Or preventing a circuit. When he takes them off, his body makes direct contact with the ground. The hypothesis suggests this might have allowed electrical currents, perhaps related to the entity's manifestation or the charged ground itself, to flow through his body,
Creating an electrical potential difference.
possibly leading to an influx of energy into Moses's own theorized dark plasma component. Remember, the idea is humans might have a dark plasma counterpart too.
Whoa. So removing the sandals effectively plugged him in. And that energy surge triggered the dark ionization process around Moses himself.
That's the speculation, leading to an ordinary cold plasma envelope, maybe a strong glow mode forming around him.
Which perfectly explains that other detail. Later, when he comes down the mountain, the text says his face was radiant, shining, sending forth beams, so much so that people were scared and he had to wear a veil.
Exactly. He wasn't reflecting divine glory in a metaphorical sense. He was literally glowing, emitting light from a sustained cold plasma aura because his own dark plasma body had been energized by proximity to that highly energetic entity on the mountain.
That really reframes a foundational miracle into intersector energy transfer. Okay, let's jump forward. New Testament, Pentecost, Acts chapter 2. The apostles are gathered, they hear a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and then see tongues as of fire landing on each of their heads.
Right. Let's take the violent wind first. That sounds very much like an electric wind.
Electric wind.
Yeah, it's a known phenomenon with intense plasma discharge or ionization. If you suddenly create a huge number of ions, all with the same electrical charge in a confined space.
They repel each other vigorously.
Exactly. That mutual repulsion creates a powerful jet of air movement, a pressure change. It would sound like a rushing wind, maybe even have a physical force, and often comes with a hissing or buzzing noise. The account says it filled the house, suggesting a pretty large or intense ionization event.
Okay, the wind makes sense physically.
Yeah.
But the tongues of fire, specifically landing on their heads, that seems too precise.
Well, plasma is very sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and the human body generates its own biomagnetic fields.
Especially the heart and brain, right?
Correct. And these fields might be amplified during states like deep, focused prayer, which the apostles were engaged in.
So the apostles were like little individual magnetic targets.
In a sense, yes. The decaying ordinary cold plasma envelope generated by this big ionization event could have thrown off smaller discharges. Think little arcs or streamers of plasma.
Like mini lightning bolts.
Sort of. And these plasma discharges would be naturally attracted to the points of strongest electrical potential or magnetic field strength, which would likely be the polarized heads and brains of the praying apostles.
So they wouldn't just dissipate randomly, they'd be drawn to the apostles' heads and manifest as these flickering tongues of fire.
That's the hypothesis. They'd cling briefly to the most electromagnetically active points.
The sources mention, don't they, that sometimes these discharges are artistically shown as doves, like at Jesus' baptism too. It's fascinating how the interpretation varies, but the core observation of a bright, moving, maybe bird-like shape of light stays consistent.
It does. And you see the same underlying pattern potentially explaining Jesus' transfiguration, acquiring that luminous glow on Mount Tabor, or the blinding light that supposedly struck Saul on the road to Damascus.
So all potentially examples of transient cold plasma being generated, maybe triggered by an external entity or even an internal energy surge in the subject's own dark plasma body via dark ionization.
That's the unifying framework proposed. And the fact that this kind of luminous effect, this effludia, as some texts call it, is reported around saints and mystics across centuries, well, the argument is that makes it a repeatable empirical observation, not just isolated one-off miracles.
Okay, the ancient texts are powerful, but they lack detail sometimes. The 20th century gives us something new. Modern multi-witness accounts, sometimes even photos or film. This lets us test the dark plasma hypothesis with more precision. Let's look at the Marian apparitions, starting with Zeitan, Egypt in 1968.
Zeitan is a fascinating case because it was so public. Thousands of witnesses, Christians, Muslims, secular onlookers over several years. It was photographed, filmed, even broadcast on Egyptian TV. and investigators found absolutely no evidence of projectors or any kind of hoax.
And what were the key visual characteristics reported?
A clear and bright luminous body, often appearing above the Coptic church. Crucially, photographs and witness accounts described it as being translucent.
Okay, luminosity points again to light generation via dark ionization.
Yeah.
And translucence. That's a specific setting on the plasma frequency gate we talked about, right?
Exactly. Translucence or transparency happens when the plasma's internal frequency is lower than the ambient light frequency.
Oh.
The entity is controlling its density to let light pass through. The fact it was caught on camera emitting ordinary photons really anchors it as a physical phenomenon, regardless of whether people interpreted it as the Virgin Mary.
Weren't there also other phenomena seen around the main figure, like dove-like shapes?
Yes, that's another recurring element. Witnesses described luminous, dove-like shapes, sometimes preceding the main apparition. They were described as strange, bird-like creatures made of light that glided without flapping their wings.
Which sounds like?
Smaller, mobile plasma formations, possibly operating in that high-energy arc mode, making them appear as dazzling points or shapes of light. Maybe smaller dark plasma entities acting as precursors, maybe just energetic discharges from the main entity. It connects right back to the doves mentioned in the Pentecost accounts and elsewhere.
It's the consistency that's striking. Okay, let's move to probably the most famous and analyzed modern apparition. Fatima, Portugal, 1917. The whole sequence of events is complex, but it starts before the big miracle of the sun. The three shepherd children first encountered something they called the angel of peace.
Right, and how did it first appear? As a dazzling globe of light like a miniature sun, which then seemed to resolve or change into a figure described as a transparent young man.
Okay, that sequence alone is loaded with potential correlations for the plasma model.
Absolutely. Let's break it down using the model's principles. First, the default shape. In Earth gravity, the most energy-stable shape for a plasma body is often an obovoid, like a teardrop, an egg, or a sphere. Think of a candle flame or a bubble.
So the dazzling globe, or miniature sun, could be the entity in its baseline, stable, high-energy arc mode form.
Precisely. That's its default low-effort state. Then, the change from that globe into a transparent young man.
That shows density control again. It shifted from high-density arc mode, dazzling, to low-density transparent mode, and at the same time, it changed shape from the simple ovoid to a more complex humanoid form.
Correct. And maintaining that complex humanoid shape likely requires significantly more energy and control than just being a blob of light.
Oh, and accompanying the initial appearance, the children reported a sudden strong wind.
The electric wind again, generated by the initial large-scale ionization. It keeps showing up. It does. But Fatima also highlights another aspect: selective visibility. Often, only the children who were deep in prayer, you could call it a non-ordinary state of consciousness, could actually see the entity clearly. The adults present often saw nothing, or maybe just secondary effects like the wind or changes in light.
How does the hypothesis explain that? Why could the kids see it and not the adults?
This brings in the concept of dark sight. The theory suggests that if humans do have this dark plasma component or double,
Our own personal bit of dark matter structure.
yes, then certain states, deep meditation, prayer, maybe trauma or extreme focus, might temporarily shift the locus of our consciousness, away from the ordinary physical body and senses, and towards perceiving through this dark plasma component.
So the children were essentially tuning into the dark matter sector because of their state of mind.
That's the idea. It allowed them to perceive the dark plasma entity directly, using dark sight. Meanwhile, the adults, operating with normal physical sight, could only perceive the effects in the ordinary world, the transient, ordinary cold plasma envelope, the light, the wind, which might be fleeting, partial, or just not there at all. They weren't tuned to the right frequency, so to speak.
Okay, that's a potential explanation for subjective elements. But now let's get to the big objective event, the miracle of the sun, on October 13th, 1917. Tens of thousands of people saw this. Witnesses across a wide area. What did they report?
They reported seeing the sun, or what looked like the sun described often as a silver disk detached from the clouds, whirl violently like a Catherine wheel, throw off streams of multicolored light, and then appear to plunge towards the earth in a terrifying zigzag motion.
And crucially, it generated intense heat. People were soaked from hours of rain and reported their clothes, and the muddy ground dried almost instantly.
Right. Now, obviously, the actual astronomical sun cannot do this. If our sun moved like that or got that close, the Earth would be instantly vaporized. So it must have been a local atmospheric phenomenon, however spectacular.
So what was it, according to the dark plasma hypothesis?
The paper suggests it was likely a very large, localized ball of ordinary complex plasma, sometimes called dusty plasma, operating in arc mode.
Complex or dusty plasma? What's that?
It's basically ordinary plasma that contains tiny, microscopic dust grains. It's actually very common in Earth's atmosphere, especially higher up in the mesosphere. A huge formation of this, energized into arc mode by an underlying dark ionization event, would be incredibly bright, visible over a wide area, and its apparent rapid descent would match the plunging description.
Okay, that covers the brightness and movement. What about the colors? The whirling kaleidoscopic light show.
That's a key signature of complex plasma. It's often thermochromic.
Thermochromic changes color with temperature.
Exactly. As this huge plasma ball whirled and potentially compressed and expanded during its descent, different parts would experience rapid temperature fluctuations. These temperature changes would cause the plasma emissions to shift through various colors, red, yellow, violet, precisely matching the multicolored rays reported by the witnesses.
And the heat, drawing tens of thousands of people's clothes and the ground in minutes. That requires an immense amount of energy.
It absolutely does. And a massive ball of ordinary plasma, even if technically cold or non-thermal in its generation method, represents a huge concentration of energy. When generated by an extremely powerful dark ionization process, it would radiate intensely, including in the infrared and microwave spectrum.
Ah, back to the infrared and microwave.
Yes. That directed thermal radiation, hitting the crowd from this large overhead source, could absolutely deliver enough energy to cause the rapid drying effect reported. It confirms a very real, very high-energy physical event took place, which was then understandably interpreted through a religious lens by the observers.
The explanatory power seems pretty broad if it can cover things like the burning bush and Fatima. The hypothesis claims universality, though. It should connect to global folklore too, right? Let's look at jinns from Islamic tradition.
Right. The Qur'an offers some fascinating descriptions. Jinns are said to be created from smokeless fire.
Smokeless fire. That sounds like a pretty good poetic description of plasma, doesn't it? Light without combustion.
It really does. And they're also described elsewhere as aerial animals with transparent bodies which can assume various forms.
Okay, there we have it again. Aerial, they fly or float. Transparent, that's low density, transparent mode. Assume various forms, that's shape-shifting via density and frequency control. The same characteristics pop up.
Exactly. And consider the popular image of a genie, a type of jinn, being squeezed into a tiny lamp or bottle.
Yeah.
That's basically a folk observation of a low-density plasma life form doing what it naturally can, reducing its volume and density significantly, which, remember, is the necessary first step for increasing density later to trigger the dark ionization process and manifest more visibly.
It's also interesting that jinn stories seem particularly common in hot, dry desert regions. Is there a potential physical reason for that?
There could be. The ionization potential of air, how easily it becomes plasma, is generally lower in hot, dry conditions.
Meaning it takes less energy to ionize the air.
Yes, so the ordinary cold plasma shell generated by a jinn's dark ionization process might persist longer and be more stable in that kind of environment. The climate itself could make manifestations easier or more frequent.
Fascinating. Okay, let's broaden out from jinns to the general idea of ghosts found in paranormal literature worldwide. How do their typical reported traits fit the model of complex, dark plasma beings?
Well, let's tick off some common ghost characteristics. They move through walls and obstacles, right?
The classic ghost move.
That fits perfectly with the idea of a collisionless, low-density plasma. The particles are so spread out and not rigidly bound like solid matter that they can interpenetrate ordinary materials without significant interaction.
What about floating? And the common story that you often can't see their feet or they seem to sink into the floor?
Floating is natural for a buoyant plasma body. As for the feet, a couple of possibilities within the model. The plasma might just be extremely tenuous at the extremities, falling below the visibility threshold. Or, if we assume the ghost's dark plasma body is superimposed on the ordinary room, its lower part might be sinking into the dark plasma replica of the floor. Since that dark floor isn't solid to the dark body, it looks like it's partially submerged.
Okay. And the physical sensations people report. Cold spots, faint sounds, maybe feeling a touch.
That comes back to that fifth force veneer, that thin layer of attracted ordinary matter. It's not much, but it might be just enough to displace air slightly, creating cold spots via electric wind or faint sounds if it interacts with surfaces. And that same veneer making momentary contact could create the sensation of touch, often described as cold or electric.
Okay, what about the idea found in a lot of ghost hunting shows and literature that ghosts feed on electricity? They often seem to manifest near power lines, electrical equipment, or during thunderstorms.
The hypothesis suggests it's probably not feeding in a biological sense. It's more likely facilitation,
Mhm.
meaning that a slightly ionized environment, which you'd find near active electrical equipment or during a storm, makes it easier for the ghost entity to generate and sustain its ordinary cold plasma envelope. The pre-ionized air acts like a stabilizing medium, reducing the energy needed for the ghost to manifest visibly or interact.
So the electricity doesn't power the ghost, it just makes the air more conducive to the ghost appearing.
That seems more physically plausible, yes. The sources also touch on how recently deceased individuals whose dark plasma double might still be coherent and near their place of death
Yeah.
might cause electrical interference. Flickering lights, phones ringing, TVs turning on or off. Not through psychic energy, but potentially through the dark ionization process happening right at electrical junctions or circuits. Or possibly through something called kinetic mixing.
Kinetic mixing. Okay,
Yeah.
what's that? Is that like dark energy and regular energy getting their wires crossed?
That's actually a pretty good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kinetic mixing is a theoretical physics concept where certain dark sector particles, like hypothetical dark photons, might be able to oscillate or convert into their ordinary sector counterparts, like regular photons.
So energy literally jumps the fence from the dark sector to ours.
Potentially, yes. If that happens near an electrical circuit, it could induce currents or affect light emission. So again, it reframes poltergeist activity from supernatural malice to unintended intersector physical interactions.
Okay, that's a lot. But maybe the most compelling connection to real-world data mentioned in the sources is seasonal variation in ghost sightings.
This is a big one. There's the ancient Chinese tradition of the Hungry Ghosts Festival, right? It's typically celebrated around August. The timing suggests it might be based on historical observations of increased ghostly phenomena around that time of year.
Okay, an old tradition. How does that connect to modern physics?
Through dark matter detection experiments, specifically DAMA-Libra in Italy. This experiment, running for years deep underground, has consistently detected an annual modulation signal.
Meaning the amount of dark matter particles they detect changes predictably throughout the year.
Exactly. They see a peak flux around early June and a minimum around December. This is widely interpreted as evidence of the Earth moving through the galaxy's dark matter halo. We hit the densest headwind of dark matter particles around June.
Whoa. So peak dark matter detection in June. Peak historical ghost sightings observed around August.
The correlation is striking. The dark plasma hypothesis suggests that this June peak in dark matter particles raining down increases the density within the co-rotating dark Earths. More density means a higher probability of interactions and collisions that trigger the dark ionization process.
Leading to more visible plasma manifestations, more ghost sightings, maybe lagging slightly into July and August.
Precisely. That potential time lag makes the correlation even more interesting, perhaps relating to how the dark matter settles or interacts within the dark Earth structure relative to our position. It reframes the Hungry Ghost Festival not just as folklore, but as a potential empirical data point tracking a real seasonal fluctuation in intersector phenomena driven by galactic dynamics.
That's powerful if true. Finally, the sources stress global parallels. It's not just Judeo-Christian or Islamic accounts.
Absolutely not. You look worldwide and you see a recurring triad of characteristics associated with powerful beings or spirits. Think of Agni, the Hindu fire god, or the lightning birds of Zulu folklore, or Shango, the Yoruba deity of thunder and lightning, or even the Aboriginal rainbow serpent traditions in Australia.
That's the common thread.
They all consistently link luminosity, glowing, fiery appearance, electromagnetic discharge, fire, lightning, thunder, and often weather control associated with storms, rain, electric wind effects.
So light, electricity, and atmospheric effects. The same package deal, just described in different cultural languages.
That's the argument. The rainbow serpent, for instance, a huge, colorful, glowing entity associated with creating rain and storms, sounds remarkably like a description of a large-scale, complex, thermochromic plasma formation generating electric winds. It suggests that people everywhere, regardless of their specific beliefs, were observing and documenting the same fundamental class of large-scale, energetic plasma phenomena.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground here. We've gone from subatomic particles like X-17 all the way up to these enormous atmospheric phenomena like the miracle of the sun. Let's try and synthesize this for you, our listener. What are the clear takeaways from this deep dive?
I think the most powerful takeaway, looking through the lens of J. Alfred's dark plasma hypothesis, is the emergence of these incredibly consistent shared descriptive similarities. They cut across centuries, cultures, and types of phenomena, whether called angels, jinns, ghosts, or miracles.
Right, let's list them. First, there's luminosity,
Yeah.
almost always described as self-generated, often brilliant light, glowing, dazzling the smokeless fire. That clearly points to plasma in arc or glow mode.
Then there's form, a tendency towards stable, simple shapes like ovoids, globes, balls of light as a baseline, but also the ability to use more energy to take on transient, complex forms, often humanoid, by manipulating their density and plasma frequency.
And third, the consistent atmospheric and electrical effects. We heard it again and again. The sudden winds, the electric wind, rapid temperature drops, those cold spots. And in modern times, electromagnetic interference with devices all seem to be direct physical byproducts of generating that ordinary cold plasma envelope via dark ionization.
And finally, the evidence for high-energy manifestations. These things aren't always subtle. They can produce blinding light, directed beams, intense heat, consistent with plasma operating in that high-energy arc mode, the fire that doesn't consume chemically but definitely carries energy.
So bringing it all together, the unifying conclusion presented in these sources is pretty radical.
Yeah.
Is that these phenomena don't actually require us to invoke the supernatural, do they?
That's the core argument. They suggest these are all culturally filtered observations of repeated encounters with a single underlying physical reality. A reality best explained, according to this hypothesis, by the physics of dark plasma interacting between our sector and these proposed co-rotating dark Earths.
And the implication then is huge. It basically reframes all these ancient texts, religious, mythological, historical, as potentially valuable, untapped empirical data.
Exactly. Data for the very frontiers of modern physics, particularly dark matter research. And it forces us to seriously consider expanding our definition of life beyond just carbon-based biology. We might need to look for plasma-based intelligence.
So the final thought then,
Yeah.
what does this all mean for us right now? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think this analysis really drives home that the universe could be far stranger, but also far closer than we typically imagine. If modern science, organizations like NASA or SETI, are genuinely looking for the full spectrum of life and intelligence, maybe they need to adjust their focus slightly.
How so?
The search for weird life might not primarily be about finding extraterrestrial intelligence light years away. It might be about looking for interterrestrial intelligence, these potential dark plasma neighbors right here, interacting with us from the dark Earths co-rotating with our own planet. Neighbors we may have been meticulously documenting and completely misunderstanding throughout all of recorded human history. And if that's true, well, that changes just about everything.